Tough conditions are from refreshing carefully. Tough conditions are from refreshing carefully. tough conditions or from refreshing. Carefully. Quirky tidbit. Soviet soldiers reportedly called it Second Front. Not because of strategy, but because it came after the first front of edible food. They treated it like gold, bartered it, hoarded it, even gifted it. You, on the other hand, would gladly never see another can in your life. You trade a pack of cigarettes for a packet of hot sauce. It helps. A little. Turns out, even spam has a curve of diminishing returns. You start fantasizing about peanut butter, apples, fresh bread, anything with crunch, anything that didn't survive the war in a can. Quirky tidbit. Soviet soldiers reportedly called it Second Front. Not because of strategy, but because it came after the first front of edible food. They treated it like gold, bartered it, even gifted it. You, on the other hand, would gladly never see another can in your life. You trade a pack of cigarettes for a packet of hot sauce. It helps. A little. Turns out, even spam has a curve of diminishing returns. You start fantasizing about peanut butter, apples, fresh bread, anything with crunch, anything that didn't survive the war in a can. But here's a quirky tidbit. The coffee's quality varied wildly. Sometimes it was so strong it could strip paint. Other times it was so weak it felt like flavored water. You learned to ration it carefully. 1 cup for morale, 2 cups for despair. and never more than 3 or risk the jitters turning into the shakes. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of instant coffee actually improved soldier morale, or if it simply masked deeper exhaustion and hunger. Some say it was essential to keeping troops alert. Others think it only prolonged the inevitable mental fatigue. But you don't have time to debate. You have to keep moving. They treated it like gold, bartered it, hoarded it, even gifted it. You, on the other hand, would gladly never see another can in your life. You trade a pack of cigarettes for a packet of hot sauce. It helps. A little. Turns out, even spam has a curve of diminishing returns. You start fantasizing about peanut butter, apples, fresh bread, anything with crunch, anything that didn't survive the war in a can. But here's a quirky tidbit. The coffee's quality varied wildly. Sometimes it was so strong it could strip paint. Other times it was so weak it felt like flavored water. You learned to ration it carefully, 1 cup for despair, and never more than 3 or risk the jitters turning into the shakes. Historians still argue whether you drag yourself out of the tent just as dawn spills pale light across the endless expanse of mud and broken trees. Your stomach protests, but there's no time to feel sorry for it. Today's ration is the dreaded K ration. 3 small metal boxes designed to be carried by foot soldiers like you during long marches or emergencies. Compact, lightweight, and, frankly, uninspired. Would gladly never see another can in your life. You trade a pack of cigarettes for a packet of hot sauce. It helps. A little. Turns out even Spam has a curve of diminishing returns. You start fantasizing about peanut butter, apples, fresh bread, anything with crunch, anything that didn't survive the war in a can. But here's a quirky tidbit. The coffee's quality varied wildly. Sometimes it was so strong it could strip paint. Other times it was so weak it felt like flavored water. You learned to ration it carefully, 1 cup for morale, 2 cups for despair, and never more than 3 or risk the jitters turning into the shakes. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of you drag yourself out of the tent just as dawn spills pale light across the endless expanse of mud and broken trees. But there's no time to feel sorry for it. Today's ration is the dreaded K-ration. 3 small metal boxes designed to be carried by foot soldiers like you during long marches or emergencies. Compact, lightweight, and, frankly, uninspired. Would gladly never see another can in your life. You trade a pack of cigarettes for a packet of hot sauce. It helps. Turns out even Spam has a curve of diminishing returns. You start fantasizing about peanut butter, apples, fresh bread, anything with crunch, anything that didn't survive the war in a can. But here's a quirky tidbit. The coffee's quality varied wildly. Sometimes it was so strong it could strip paint. Other times it was so weak it felt like flavored water. You learned to ration it carefully, 1 cup for morale, 2 cups for despair, and never more than 3 or risk the jitters turning into the shakes. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of you drag yourself out of the tent just as dawn spills pale light across the endless expanse of mud and broken trees. Your stomach protests, but there's no time to feel sorry for it. Today's ration is the dreaded K ration. 3 small metal boxes designed to be carried by foot soldiers like you during long marches or emergencies. Compact, lightweight, and, frankly, uninspired. Would gladly never see another life. You trade a pack of cigarettes for a packet of hot sauce. It helps. A little. Turns out, even Spam has a curve of diminishing returns. You start fantasizing about peanut butter, apples, fresh bread, anything with crunch, anything that didn't survive the war in a can. You remember hearing that the Germans had their own version of field bread called Wehrmachtbrot, which was often made with rye and sometimes mixed with sawdust or other fillers during shortages. Talk about chewing on history, sometimes literally. Then there's the peculiar story of the victory bread, a British concoction made with barley, oats, and even dried vegetables mixed into the dough. It was called a victory because it tasted almost edible despite the odd ingredients. Soldiers joked that you could eat victory bread and survive a tank shell, though that's probably just bravado. You take a moment to watch the camp around you. Soldiers trade pieces of bread for chocolate or cigarettes, bartering like kids on a playground. This simple act reminds you that no matter the horrors outside, humans always find ways to connect, even over something as basic as bread. You chew again, your mind drifting. Bread, after all, is more than food. It's history baked into every bite. The stories of people trying to hold on to humanity when the world is falling apart. As the day wears on, you find yourself craving something sweet. Luckily, there's a small tin of jam in the ration pack. It's thick and sticky, packed with sugar and the faintest hint of fruit. You spread a little on your bread, feeling the sugar rush hit your tongue like a tiny celebration dot. You smile despite yourself, knowing that tomorrow will bring another day of war, mud, and ration surprises. But today, there's bread. And for now, that's enough. You wake up to the crackle of a campfire and the smell of something smoky and strange. Not quite breakfast, but close enough. Today's menu isn't just about rations. It's about what soldiers managed to scavenge or barter from local towns and villages. It's a patchwork feast, cobbled together from what's available beyond the standard issued food. The quirky part. Soldiers quickly developed nicknames for these scavenged foods. Trench truffles for the occasional mushrooms found in muddy forests. Sniper's stew, when a lucky hunter brought back wild game. And mud pies for, well, anything unidentifiable that looked edible, but probably wasn't. Historians still argue whether relying on scavenged food helped morale or just exposed soldiers to risks like food poisoning. Some claim these extras were vital for health, providing vitamins missing from processed rations. Others warn they sometimes led to sickness, which could sideline soldiers at critical moments. Didn't survive the war in a can. You remember hearing that the Germans had their own version of field bread called Wehrmachtbrot, which was often made with rye and sometimes mixed with sawdust or other fillers during shortages. Talk about chewing on history, sometimes literally. You trade a chocolate bar with a buddy for a handful of eggs that a local farmer smuggled from a nearby coop. The eggs are a miracle. Their smooth shells almost glowing against the dirt. Boiled, they taste like a promise of better days. One peculiar tale from the Eastern Front tells of soldiers who roasted tree bark and added it to their stew for extra flavor. It's unclear if they were being resourceful or just desperate. You shake your head, thinking about how far food ingenuity goes when survival is on the line. Your mind drifts to the British mulligatawny soup, which became popular among troops stationed in India. It was a spicy mix of lentils, vegetables, and curry spices, a rare treat compared to the bland, canned foods. You imagine the warmth spreading through your chest, a sharp contrast to the biting cold that usually accompanies you. As you eat, you notice the differences between fronts. American soldiers in Europe often had better supply lines, while Soviet troops sometimes subsisted almost entirely on whatever they could forage. The Japanese front featured rice-based meals and dried fish, a stark contrast to the canned meats and biscuits in the West dot. You chew thoughtfully and sip your water, pondering how food can tell the story of an entire war. It's not just about survival, but about culture, adaptation, and the human spirit. Later, you recall a story about a soldier who smuggled a small onion bulb from a French village, planting it in a trench garden. Over weeks, it grew enough to add fresh flavor to their meals. A tiny victory against the monotony and misery of war. You wonder if someday you'll taste in fresh vegetables again without wondering if they'll make you sick or get you killed. Until then, you'll cherish these small gifts from the earth, no matter how humble. Dot. As night falls, you feel a quiet gratitude for the berries, eggs, and stories that remind you there's life beyond the rations. Maybe, just maybe, food can still be a comfort, even here. You wake up to a chorus of clinking spoons and the faint hiss of hot water from a field kettle. Today, the focus is on hydration, the unsung hero of a soldier's daily routine. After all, No matter how filling the food without water, nothing works right. You glance at your canteen and wonder, how do soldiers actually keep clean water flowing in the middle of a war zone? A mainstream fact. Armies developed elaborate water purification systems to protect troops from deadly diseases. The U.S. Army, for instance, issued iodine tablets and set up mobile filtration units to treat water from streams, rivers, and wells. It was a matter of life and death, since contaminated water could spread dysentery, cholera, and typhoid faster than enemy fire. Here's a quirky detail. Soldiers sometimes referred to iodine-treated water as bleach water, complaining it tasted like a swimming pool mixed with a grandma's medicine cabinet. Some daring souls tried to mask the taste with powdered drink mixes, or even threw in chewing gum, though it rarely helped much. Historians still argue whether the water treatment efforts fully prevented outbreaks, or if more could have been done. Some believe that poor sanitation and logistical challenges caused unnecessary illness, while others highlight the remarkable efforts made under tough conditions. You remember watching a comrade try to filter water through a sock, then boiling it over the fire. The smell of burning wood mixed with that sharp iodine tang fills your memory. You decide to take a careful sip of your own treated water. Clean, but far from refreshing. Sometimes soldiers would risk drinking untreated water when desperate, especially during long marches where supplies ran low. That gamble often led to days spent confined to medical tents, far from the front lines. It's a grim reminder that even the best armies can be undone by something as simple as bad water. There's a strange story from the Pacific Theater about soldiers using coconut shells as makeshift water containers, collecting rainwater and filtering it through sand and charcoal. Ingenious, yes, but far from foolproof. You can't help but admire their creativity. On the other hand, British troops in North Africa learned to drink from underground cisterns, sometimes digging wells themselves. The harsh desert climate made water a precious commodity, and soldiers rationed every drop carefully. You chew on a dry biscuit while sipping water, thinking about how every gulp is a victory against dehydration. The sun beats down mercilessly, and sweat stings your eyes. Your throat feels parched despite the canteen's content. A curious tidbit is that some soldiers carried small personal water stills, devices designed to distill contaminated water into drinkable steam. They were bulky and slow, but for some units they were a lifeline. Your mind wanders to how civilians in war zones coped with water shortages and contamination. You imagine families collecting rainwater on rooftops, rationing their supply while bombs fell nearby. Food might be scarce, but water scarcity was an invisible, deadly enemy. You take another sip, appreciating the cool liquid more than you thought possible. It's not just about hydration, it's about staying alive. As the day wears on, you feel the dull ache of thirst lessen, replaced by a quiet respect for the simple miracle of clean water. In a world of chaos, this small comfort is a treasure beyond measure. The sun sets, and the camp settles into a low murmur of voices and rustling tents. Tonight, you focus on a different kind of ration. The energy boosts soldiers craved during long, exhausting days. Caffeine and sugar, those little hits of life, kept tired eyes open and spirits barely afloat. A mainstream fact. Coffee was a staple for soldiers worldwide, especially Americans. Field rations often included instant coffee packets, designed to dissolve quickly and provide a jolt without the fuss of brewing. It was more about the ritual and caffeine kick than flavor, though some claimed it tasted like burnt rubber. The quirky tidbit: British troops nicknamed their instant coffee the Black Death, while German soldiers called their brew Ersatzkaffee, meaning substitute coffee, often made from roasted acorns or chicory. Soldiers joked about drinking mud juice just to feel awake enough to face the day. Historians still argue whether caffeine helped soldiers perform better or simply masked exhaustion until breakdown. Some studies suggested improved alertness temporarily, but others warn it led to crashes and dependency in the harshest moments. Reminder that even the best armies can be undone by something as simple as bad water. There's a strange story from the Pacific Theater about soldiers using coconut shells as makeshift water containers, collecting rainwater and filtering it through sand and charcoal. Ingenious, yes, but far from foolproof. You can't help but admire their creativity. On the other hand, alongside coffee, sugar cubes or condensed milk were prized treats, sometimes used to sweeten the brew or eaten on their own for quick energy. You fish around your pack and find a tiny tin of sweetened condensed milk, marveling at how such a small thing feels like a treasure in this landscape of ration monotony. Down mercilessly, and sweat stings your eyes. Your throat feels parched despite the canteen's content. A curious tidbit is that some soldiers carried small personal water stills, devices designed to distill contaminants. Then there's the odd practice of some units chewing on caffeine tablets. Yes, actual pills designed to keep troops awake. You shudder a little at the thought. Popping a pill to fake alertness rather than drinking coffee. That's a story for the future generations, you think, with a mix of sympathy and disbelief. You watch a fellow soldier carefully divide his last sugar cubes, trading half for a cigarette. The barter system thrives on these small luxuries, and everyone knows the value of caffeine and sugar when nerves fray. The Germans took their coffee differently, sometimes substituting it with pea coffee, made from roasted peas, an ingenious but hardly tasty workaround during shortages. Soldiers laughed it off, but you wonder if any of them genuinely liked the taste. You wonder, too, about the soldiers who had no coffee at all, how they managed the cold mornings, the endless marches, the need to stay alert when danger lurked nearby. You imagine their strength, fueled by sheer willpower, or perhaps just a stubborn refusal to surrender to fatigue. Your coffee is almost gone now. You savor the last bitter sip, knowing that despite its flaws, this small ritual keeps you connected to normalcy, to moments of calm amid the madness. The night grows darker, and you tuck the empty packet away. Tomorrow will bring more challenges, but for now, you rest with the quiet buzz of caffeine in your veins and the comfort of a shared human need for energy. You wake to the sound of rations being handed out and the smell of something sweet, which is a rare and wonderful change from the usual monotony. Today, dessert, or at least the closest thing to it, is on the menu. Yes, even soldiers get a sweet tooth. Here's a mainstream fact. During WWII, soldiers were often issued D-ration bars, dense, chocolate-flavored emergency energy bars designed to survive heat and rough handling. Unlike your typical candy bar, these were more about survival than indulgence, often called Hitler's secret weapon, because they tasted so bad it supposedly discouraged desertion. Whether that's true or just wartime propaganda, you decide to test it yourself. A quirky tidbit. Some soldiers referred to D rations as toothpaste bars, because of their texture and aftertaste. The joke was that they could double as toothpaste if you were desperate, though you're not sure anyone ever actually tried. Others called them death rations, a nod to how hard they were to choke down. You fish around your pack and find a tiny tin of sweetened condensed milk, marveling at how such a small thing feels like a treasure in this landscape of ration monotony. Down mercilessly, and sweat stings your eyes. Your throat feels parched despite the canteen's content. You unwrap a D ration bar carefully. The texture is hard and chalky, with a faintly sweet smell that barely masks the bitterness. You bite into it, feeling the grit in your mouth, and tasting the faintest hint of cocoa underneath the chalkiness. It's not candy, but it's fuel. Other sweet treats were rare but prized. Canned fruit, jams, and occasionally hard candies. You remember hearing about British soldiers receiving bully beef tins that sometimes came with a tiny packet of crystallized sugar, a small luxury in an otherwise salty diet. You think of the tropical rations given to soldiers in hot climates, which included fruit juices and dehydrated fruits. These were as close as some troops got to fresh fruit, and the difference in morale was palpable. There's an odd story of a soldier who hid a small tin of fruit cocktail beneath his bunk for months, savoring spoonfuls in secret like a forbidden treasure. It was his way of holding on to hope and sweetness in a bitter world. You chew slowly on the D ration, letting the harsh texture dissolve before swallowing. It's a far cry from the chocolates you remember from childhood, but it's a reminder that even in war, sweetness finds a way. Later, you might share your ration with a friend or trade it for a smoke. The bar is tough but priceless. It's energy, comfort, and a small reminder of home wrapped into one dot. As night descends and the camp quiets, you tuck away the last crumbs, already thinking of the next meal and the next bite of sweetness, however hard it might be to swallow. You wake to a chill that cuts through your uniform, reminding you that food isn't just about taste or energy, it's about survival in every brutal climate. Today's focus is the challenges soldiers faced feeding themselves in the freezing cold of the Eastern Front, where frostbite was as common as hunger. A mainstream fact, Soviet soldiers often had to endure brutal winters with limited supplies. Their rations, like the infamous black bread, dense, dark, and sometimes moldy, were supplemented by hot soups and stews when possible. But scarcity was a constant threat. The harsh winter conditions turned every meal into a fight against starvation and frostbite. The quirky tidbit: some troops resorted to melting snow on their helmets over small fires, using whatever fuel they could find, sometimes even burning their own boots or gear to stay warm and prepare food. Not the Michelin star method, but effective under the circumstances. Historians still argue whether the extreme weather or enemy action caused more casualties on the Eastern Front. Some say starvation and cold were as deadly as bullets. Others argue that the chaos of war played a larger role. You wrap your fingers around a steaming tin of soup. The warmth, a brief comfort against the biting wind. The soup is thin and salty, lacking much substance, but every sip feels like a small victory dot. In these conditions, soldiers often carried dried fish or salted meats, foods that could survive freezing temperatures but tested their teeth and patience. The salt sometimes caused dehydration, but at least the food kept longer. You hear stories of soldiers who crafted trench ovens from scavenged metal scraps, allowing them to bake small batches of bread or warm meals. Creativity wasn't just encouraged. It was essential. The idea of fresh food in this frozen wasteland seems almost laughable. Yet some lucky units managed to trade with local farmers or find frozen vegetables hidden beneath snowbanks. The irony of frost-preserved food became a cruel joke among the men. You remember the tale of a soldier who buried his last piece of chocolate deep in the snow, hoping to save it for a special occasion. Months later, it was a frozen, shattered mess, but still a treasure dot. Hot drinks like tea, often boiled from pine needles or dried herbs, were another rare comfort. They provided warmth and some vitamins, though nothing like the fresh brews of home. Your stomach growls, and you realize that in this frozen theater of war, food was never just about filling a hole. It was a lifeline, a daily battle against nature's cruelty. As the wind whistles around you, you tuck your scarf tighter and take another careful sip of soup, knowing that every warm bite brings you closer to surviving another day in this frozen nightmare. You wake to the chatter of soldiers debating the merits of a new kind of ration, one designed to be light, portable, and surprisingly versatile. Today, you explore the development and impact of canned and preserved foods, innovations that reshaped wartime eating, a mainstream fact. The widespread use of canned food was a game changer for armies. Innovations in canning technology allowed foods like meats, vegetables, and even puddings to be preserved for months without spoiling. Soldiers could carry a variety of meals, reducing reliance on fresh supplies, a quirky detail. British troops often joked about their tinned surprise, a nickname for canned meat products that sometimes contained odd cuts or mystery ingredients. The cans were also infamous for their stubborn lids, requiring a good knife or a bit of brute force to open, sometimes leading to accidental cuts and curses. Historians still argue whether canned food was nutritionally adequate over long periods, with some suggesting vitamin deficiencies and others praising its reliability. The debate touches on how much canned rations sustained versus merely kept soldiers from starving. You open a tin of corned beef, the metal clink echoing in the quiet morning. The smell is strong, salty, meaty, a little metallic, but familiar. You scoop a spoonful, feeling the greasy texture coat your tongue. It's far from gourmet, but it fuels the body. Other canned goods included stews, baked beans, and even fruit cocktail, though the latter often arrived as soggy, overcooked mush. Some soldiers mixed their cans with dried bread or crackers, creating meals they called field stew. The logistics of canned food were astounding. Armies needed enormous supply chains to keep these tins rolling to front lines across continents. The scale of production and distribution was a feat of industrial engineering. You remember a story about a soldier who, after a long march, found an unopened tin of peaches. The surprise sweetness felt like a glimpse of paradise, a stark contrast to the usual ration monotony. The Germans, facing supply shortages later in the war, sometimes resorted to ersatz canned foods, substitutes made from unconventional ingredients, like vegetable pulp or even algae. Soldiers shared grim jokes about the mystery meat lurking inside . In your hands, the can feels cold and heavy, a simple object packed with complexity. The process of opening, sharing, and eating canned food became a ritual, a moment of normalcy amid chaos, against nature's cruelty. As the wind whistles around you, you tuck your scarf tighter and take another careful sip of soup, knowing that every warm bite brings you closer to surviving another day in this frozen nightmare. Later, you'll pass around the last of the cans, trading bits and pieces. The camaraderie formed around food is a quiet rebellion against the harshness of battle. Dot. You tuck the empty can away, feeling gratitude for the humble invention that helped to keep millions alive, one tin at a time. Morning dew clings to your gear as you consider the surprising role of animals in feeding soldiers, beyond the obvious need for cavalry or transport. Food sometimes came from unexpected sources, including the very animals you might think were enemies or odd pets. A mainstream fact. Dogs were often part of military life, used for scouting or carrying messages, but also sometimes provided meat in desperate times. Meanwhile, soldiers raised rabbits or chickens near camp to supplement their rations when supply lines faltered. A quirky tidbit. Some troops developed peculiar culinary inventions like chicken soup with a hint of pine needles, or even crocodile stew in tropical theaters. In the Pacific, soldiers sometimes caught local wildlife to stave off hunger, leading to menu items most would consider unappetizing. Historians still argue whether soldiers' reliance on foraging and hunting was widespread or limited to extreme circumstances. Some sources highlight the ingenuity and necessity of foraging, while others emphasize the military's efforts to maintain standard rations. You watch as a few soldiers carefully tend a small pen of rabbits behind the tents. These fluffy creatures are a welcome contrast to the often unidentifiable meat in your ration tins. The smell of fresh eggs and the sight of living food provides a comforting break from canned monotony. In the jungles of Southeast Asia, troops adapted local cooking methods, catching snakes or fish, and experimenting with unfamiliar ingredients. Stories circulated about soldiers who tried everything from ants to palm grubs, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of curiosity or boredom. The British developed a K-ration variant for desert and jungle warfare, including dried eggs and powdered milk, but fresh meat was still a luxury. You imagine how soldiers must have longed for the simple pleasure of a roasted chicken or a fresh catch. You remember reading about a unit that kept a pet goat for milk and companionship, a rare luxury in the middle of war's chaos. The goat's presence boosted morale, proving that food wasn't just calories, but comfort. Some soldiers turned to bizarre survival tactics, like the infamous use of crocodile dung as sunscreen, though thankfully not as food. Still, it shows the lengths troops went to adapt and survive in hostile environments. You peel open a tin and find the usual mystery meat. You chew slowly, your mind wandering to those rabbit pens, to fresh eggs steaming beside campfires, to the wild flavors soldiers braved in foreign lands. The war's strange menus remind you that hunger pushed men to extremes. And sometimes, those extremes became stories shared around campfires for years to come. You tuck the tin away, grateful for the rabbit's soft fur and the hope they represent. Tomorrow's meal might be canned, dried, or scavenged. But for now, the animals behind the scenes make a difference. You feel the gritty dirt beneath your boots as you settle in for another day, thinking about the role of improvisation in soldier meals. Because sometimes the official rations just didn't cut it, and soldiers had to get creative with what they had. A mainstream fact. Field kitchens were a logistical marvel, but breakdowns in supply meant soldiers often had to make do with whatever was on hand, scavenging, trading, or outright improvising. soldiers learned quickly how to transform canned goods, dried rations, and wild finds into palatable meals. A quirky tidbit. British troops in North Africa famously made bully beef stew, mixing canned corned beef with whatever vegetables and spices they could find, or sometimes just desert dust, if nothing else. There was also the practice of K-ration cocktail, where soldiers combined multiple small rations into one oddly flavored but filling concoction. Historians still argue whether these improvised meals boosted morale significantly or simply filled the stomach at best. Some say the creative act itself was a morale booster, while others contend it was just a survival necessity with limited psychological impact. You watch a fellow soldier carefully crush hard biscuits into crumbs, then mix them with canned meat and a splash of water to create a mushy but satisfying paste. It's not gourmet, but it's warm, filling, and beats eating rations dry. In the Pacific Theater, soldiers adapted quickly to tropical conditions by cooking with coconut milk or wrapping food in banana leaves, a far cry from the typical tin can diet. These adaptations were sometimes frowned upon by rigid supply officers, but embraced by frontline troops. You hear a story about a soldier who brewed a makeshift stew from scavenged roots, insects, and the last of his canned goods, calling it Jungle Surprise. The stew was questionable in taste, but undeniably nutritious, helping him survive long patrols. The French resistance fighters were masters of food improvisation, using small gardens, foraging, and creative cooking to sustain themselves behind enemy lines. Their resourcefulness kept many alive through harsh winters and constant danger. You take a bite of your makeshift meal and savor the small victory that comes from turning bland rations into something edible. It's a reminder that food isn't just about nutrition. It's about hope, creativity, and survival. The day wears on, and you think about the countless soldiers who, like you, turned scarcity into sustenance with little more than grit, imagination, and a pinch of desert dust dot. As night falls, the camp settles into a quiet hum of whispered stories and shared meals, all born from the need to eat and to keep going. You feel the evening cool settle over the camp, the day's hard march behind you, as your thoughts turn to the rare moments when soldiers received a taste of home, a care package or special treat that lifted spirits like nothing else, a mainstream fact. Allied soldiers often received Red Cross parcels, packed with sweets, chocolate, cigarettes, and sometimes canned delicacies from back home. These packages were highly anticipated and treasured, offering a brief respite from the harshness of standard military rations. A quirky tidbit. British troops affectionately called these packages the Sweet Salvation, and some joked that they kept the chocolate longer than the weapons. There were stories of soldiers hiding away entire parcels, rationing out treats over weeks to savor that rare taste of normal life. Historians still argue whether the distribution of care packages had significant strategic value, or was mostly a morale booster with limited impact on overall military effectiveness. Some say the emotional lift was critical. Others think it was a luxury that didn't alter the war's course. You carefully unwrap a parcel, revealing a bar of chocolate wrapped in crinkly foil, a packet of chewing gum, and a small tin of sardines. The chocolate melts slowly in your mouth, sweetness flooding your senses, reminding you of childhood treats long forgotten. Other soldiers pass around tins of condensed milk or jars of marmalade, sharing what they can with comrades who missed out. The smell of chocolate and sweet preserves fills the air, an olfactory balm against the stench of war. You recall the story of a soldier who carried a box of chocolates through the battlefields of Normandy, sharing pieces with wounded friends and strangers alike. It was a small act of kindness in a world gone mad. The parcels also included cigarettes, which, despite growing health concerns now, were a staple comfort for many troops. The ritual of sharing a smoke became a way to bond, relax, and momentarily forget the chaos around them. You consider the logistical challenge of getting these parcels across the front lines. Trucks, ships, planes all working tirelessly to maintain this fragile lifeline. Every parcel delivered was a quiet victory. As you finish the last of the chocolate, the warmth it brings feels almost sacred. It's more than food. It's a connection to a world beyond war, a reminder that sweetness and kindness still exist. The camp settles into calm as soldiers tuck away their parcels and dreams, holding on to hope wrapped in foil and memories of home. The final dusk of your long day softens the edges of the battlefield, and your mind drifts to the soldiers' enduring relationship with coffee, a liquid so deeply woven into military life that it deserves its own quiet tribute. A mainstream fact. Coffee was a staple for many soldiers, especially in the U.S. Army, where instant coffee became part of daily rations. It offered a small burst of energy and a comforting ritual amid the chaos of war, a quirky tidbit. Some soldiers became expert coffee artists of the trenches, mixing instant coffee with whatever they could find, powdered milk, sugar substitutes, or even salt, creating beverages of wildly varying flavors. Some concoctions earned nicknames like mud juice or trench brew. Historians still argue whether coffee's caffeine effects genuinely improved combat performance or merely boosted morale by providing a moment of normalcy. Either way, the ritual of coffee breaks remained sacred. You watch the steam rise from a small tin cup, the bitter aroma cutting through the cold morning air. Each sip is a small anchor to sanity, a brief pause in the relentless rhythm of orders and gunfire. The preparation was often as important as the drink itself. Soldiers built makeshift stoves, borrowed heat from campfires, and scavenged filters, from socks to leaves, to make their brew as palatable as possible. In some theaters, like Italy or France, soldiers prized local coffee beans or espresso, trading rations or valuables for a taste of authentic caffeine. The desire for a good cup was universal. You remember hearing about a unit that brewed coffee so strong it was nicknamed Liquid Courage, fueling late-night watch shifts and early morning patrols. It was as much about staying awake as about savoring flavor. The sharing of coffee became a bonding ritual. Cups passed around quietly before a patrol, or as night fell, conversations sparked by the warmth and caffeine. In these moments, soldiers found fragments of peace. As darkness deepens, the taste of bitter coffee lingers on your tongue, a reminder of resilience and the small comforts that help keep hope alive amid hardship. You lean back, letting the fading warmth cradle you as the camp falls silent, your thoughts on the countless cups that fueled courage and friendship through one of history's darkest times. Now, as the night fully wraps around you, the pace slows, the harsh edges soften, and the distant echoes of war fade into a quiet hum. Imagine the campfires dying low, the murmurs of soldiers settling into dreams, and the steady, calming rhythm of your own breathing. The stories of ration tins, hard biscuits, and muddy coffee dissolve gently, replaced by a gentle stillness. Let the warmth of shared meals and fleeting sweetness ease you into rest. The courage, the creativity, the simple acts of eating, cutting, and sharing, they all come together like a soft blanket around your shoulders. You're safe here, wrapped in the quiet glow of history's whispered tales. Close your eyes now, breathe deep, and drift gently into sleep, carried on the quiet wings of stories well told. End of script. Sweet dreams.